What if I told you that after World War II, while the world was still discovering the full horror of Nazi Germany, the United States made one of the most controversial decisions in modern history. Instead of putting every Nazi scientist on trial, America quietly brought some of them home. Not as prisoners, not as enemies, but as employees. Men who had worked under Hitler's regime were given new identities, new homes, new laboratories, and in some cases, new American futures. And the reason why is darker, more complicated, and far more disturbing than most people realize. Because this was not just about science. It was about fear, it was about power, and it was about a new war beginning before the old one had even fully ended. In 1945, Nazi Germany had fallen. Berlin was in ruins. Hitler was dead. The concentration camps had been liberated. The world had seen what the Third Reich had done. But buried inside the wreckage of Germany was something every major power wanted: knowledge. Germany had spent years building some of the most advanced military technology on Earth: rockets, jet aircraft, chemical weapons research, medical experiments, aerodynamics, ballistics, submarine technology. And among all of it, one weapon terrified the Allies more than almost anything else: the V-2 rocket. The V-2 was not just another bomb. It was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. It could fly faster than the speed of sound. By the time people heard it coming, it had already hit. London, Antwerp, and other cities had already felt its destruction. But to American military leaders, the V-2 represented something even bigger than destruction. It represented the future. Whoever controlled that technology could control the next era of war. And there was one terrifying question hanging over everything. If America did not take these scientists, who would? The answer was obvious: the Soviet Union. At the end of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies on paper. They had both fought against Nazi Germany, but behind closed doors, the alliance was already cracking. American officials knew the Soviets were searching through Germany for the same scientists, the same documents, the same weapons, and the same secrets. This was no longer just about punishing the Nazis. This was about who would dominate the world after Hitler was gone. So America faced a choice: leave the scientists in Europe and risk them working for Stalin, or bring them to America and use their knowledge first. That choice became known as Operation Paperclip. At first, it was presented as temporary. German experts would be brought to the United States under military control, questioned, studied, and used for short-term research. But temporary programs have a way of becoming permanent when fear is involved. Soon, the mission expanded. More scientists, more engineers, more specialists, and more uncomfortable questions. Because many of these men were not innocent geniuses who had simply been trapped in Germany. Some had been members of the Nazi Party. Some had worked directly on weapons that killed civilians. Some were connected to programs that used forced labor from concentration camps. The most famous name was Wernher von Braun. To many Americans, he would later become the face of space exploration. A brilliant rocket engineer, a visionary, a man who helped America reach the moon. But before he became an American space icon, von Braun had helped build rockets for Nazi Germany. The same technology that would later push humanity towards space had first been built for war. And that is the disturbing heart of this story. The road to the moon did not begin with a clean white rocket on a launch pad. It began in the shadows of World War II. It began with weapons. It began with prisoners. It began with a question governments rarely like to answer out loud. How much evil are you willing to ignore if the results are useful? American officials knew there was a moral problem. They knew bringing Nazi-linked scientists into the country would create outrage if the public understood the full story. So the records of some scientists were softened, hidden, or reclassified. A man with a Nazi past could become, on paper, a valuable technical specialist. A dangerous political record could become an inconvenient detail. The goal was simple: make them usable. Because in the eyes of military planners, these scientists were not just men. They were weapons. Their minds were strategic assets. Their knowledge could help build missiles, aircraft, defense systems, and eventually space technology. And in the early Cold War, morality was often forced to compete with national security. National security usually won. To understand why America did this, you have to understand the fear of that moment. The United States had just fought the deadliest war in human history. Millions were dead. Europe was shattered. Japan had been hit with atomic bombs. The world had entered the nuclear age, and suddenly, American leaders were looking at the Soviet Union, wondering whether the next war would be even worse. A war with rockets, a war with atomic weapons, a war where cities could be destroyed from across the world. In that kind of atmosphere, German scientists were not seen as criminals first. They were seen as advantages. And that is what makes Operation Paperclip so controversial. It shows how quickly a government can shift from justice to strategy. One moment, Nazi Germany was the enemy of civilization. The next, some of its experts were being protected because they were useful. The public was told one version of the story. Behind the scenes, another version was unfolding. Scientists who should have faced deeper investigation were instead placed inside American military and research programs. Some worked at Fort Bliss in Texas, some worked at White Sands in New Mexico, some later became part of the American rocket and space programs. And over time, the story was polished. The Nazi past faded into the background. The rocket scientists became space pioneers. The weapons became symbols of exploration. The same technology once designed to terrorize cities became part of America's dream of reaching the stars. That is why this history feels so uncomfortable. Because it is not a simple story of good versus evil. It is a story of victory becoming compromise. It is a story of a country fighting one monster, then hiring some of the people who helped build that monster's machines. And it forces us to ask a question most history books avoid. Did America win the war and then quietly adopt part of the enemy's brain? The answer is yes, but the reason was not admiration for Nazism. It was fear of losing the next war. The US did not bring these scientists because it agreed with their ideology. It brought them because their knowledge was considered too dangerous to leave behind. If the Soviets got them, America could fall behind. If America got them, the Soviets would lose that advantage. That was the calculation. Cold, strategic, ruthless. And in the Cold War, that kind of thinking became normal. Both sides wanted German expertise. Both sides wanted the future. Both sides understood that the next battlefield would not just be land, sea, and air. It would be space. And the scientists of Nazi Germany had already opened that door. The irony is almost impossible to ignore. The United States, a country that helped defeat Hitler, later used former Nazi scientists to compete against the Soviet Union and build the technology that would help put Americans on the moon. One of humanity's greatest achievements was connected, in part, to one of humanity's darkest chapters. That does not erase the achievement, but it changes how we look at it. Because history is rarely clean. It is layered. It is uncomfortable. It is full of decisions made in secret by people who believed the future of the world depended on them. And maybe they were right. Maybe without those scientists, America's missile and space programs would have moved slower. Maybe the Soviet Union would have gained a dangerous advantage. Maybe the Cold War would have looked very different, but there is another possibility. Maybe justice was sacrificed too easily. Maybe the fear of the Soviet Union became an excuse to protect men who should never have been protected. Maybe the world was so focused on the next threat that it failed to fully answer for the last one. That is the part of Operation Paperclip that still haunts people today. It is not just that Nazi scientists came to America. It is that America knew who some of them were and decided their knowledge mattered more than their past. And once you understand that, you start to see the Cold War differently. It was not only a battle between democracy and communism, it was also a race for secrets, a race for weapons, a race to capture the minds left behind by a defeated evil. And the truth is, the United States was not alone. The Soviet Union also took German scientists and engineers. Other Allied powers also wanted German research. Everyone understood that the ruins of Nazi Germany contained the blueprint for the next century. The war had ended, but the hunt had just begun. Imagine being an American official in 1945. You walk into a captured German facility and find documents filled with rocket designs. You see test data years ahead of what your country has. You discover engineers who know how to build weapons that can cross continents. And then you hear that Soviet teams are moving fast, collecting the same kind of people. Do you destroy the research? Do you arrest everyone? Do you bring them in and use them? That was the terrifying choice, and America chose use. That choice helped shape the future. It shaped missiles. It shaped the arms race. It shaped NASA. It shaped the space race. And it shaped the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the people who help build the future are running from the past. This is why Operation Paperclip remains one of the most disturbing chapters in American history, because it forces us to look at progress without the beautiful filter. It reminds us that the same rocket can be a weapon and a symbol of discovery. The same scientist can be called a genius by one country and an accomplice by another. The same government can fight evil and then make deals with men connected to it. And the question is not only why America did it, the deeper question is what America was willing to become in order to win the next war. Because after World War II, the United States looked at Nazi science and saw something it could not ignore. Not because it was moral, not because it was clean, but because it was powerful. And in the new world that was forming, power was everything. So the next time you see footage of the space race, or rockets rising into the sky, or American scientists celebrating a launch, remember this hidden chapter. Behind some of those bright flames was a shadow. A shadow from Germany. A shadow from war. A shadow from a decision made when the world was afraid of what would come next. America hired Nazi scientists after World War II because it believed the future was too dangerous to leave in enemy hands. But history still asks the question America tried to bury. When you use the knowledge of evil to build your future, can you ever fully escape the evil that helped create it?